Commitment Day is coming for Kyngstonn Viliamu-Asa, Edwin Spillman, and Deontae Robinson. Will the Buckeyes be lucky enough to receive a verbal commitment from one of the three? We dive into that question today on Locked On Buckeyes.
You are Locked On Buckeyes, your daily podcast on the Ohio State Buckeyes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, Buckeyes fans? Welcome back to another episode of Locked On Buckeyes for the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jay Stevens, also the host of the Jay Stevens Podcast. It is Wednesday, July 19th in the year 2023, and I want to thank you for making Locked On Buckeyes your first listen or first watch of every single day. During today's episode, we welcome back to the show Locked On recruiting analyst, Mr. Brian Smith. Brian and I go over, dissect, and dive into the recruitments of Kyngstonn Viliamu-Asa, Edwin Spillman, and Deontae Robinson, and where the Buckeyes stand in their chances to receive a commitment from one of these three talented athletes. These are athletes that, if you've been following Ohio State recruiting, they've been on the board. Some are higher on Ohio State's board than other. Some are higher on these players' boards than other. But Ohio State's one of those schools that their track record speaks for itself. Ryan Day is building something special in Columbus, and it makes sense why the talent that these players possess, they would consider committing to play football at The Ohio State University. You got two linebackers, one defensive tackle. All three are talented, and you'll love what Brian has to say about these players during today's show. And as we welcome in Brian Smith, Locked On's recruiting analyst, I'd like to thank LinkedIn for being the college recruiting sponsor across the Locked On Podcast Network. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnCollege. Terms and conditions apply. And I've been waiting for this conversation with Brian Smith for quite a while. I went back a few weeks ago and looked to see what players would be announcing commitments in the month of July. And I didn't realize we we're going to have so many in a short period of time, which is why it's perfect to have Brian on to talk about Kyngstonn Viliamu-Asa, Edwin Spillman, and Deontae Robinson. Brian, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, sir. How you doing?
Doing very well, very well. And I'll be doing better if one, two, or all three of these athletes commit to Ohio State this week. You have Deontae Robinson's commitment coming up July 20th, Edwin Spillman's on July 21st. Then the guy that I think is the best of the crop of three for today, Kyngstonn Viliamu-Asa out of St. John Bosco. His commitment will be on Sunday, I believe it's Sunday, July 23rd. Starting with the linebacker, Kyngstonn Viliamu-Asa. He's one that when you look at the list of finalists to get him, Ohio State, Notre Dame, USC, it's kind of blue bloods of college football. And I'm not surprised Ohio State's here, but I'm curious to hear what you have to say, Brian, about Ohio State and where they stand in the chances to get the services of Viliamu-Asa.
His camp is ultra quiet. I've talked to people on multiple sides, and everybody has an opinion. It's kind of drawing straws. The kids close the ranks and all that. But there has literally been people in all three camps that think they're getting him. That is extremely rare. Usually one of them's like, yeah, we ain't getting him. I've heard for like in all three camps, everybody thinks. So that makes me very nervous to pick. I couldn't tell you. I don't know him personally, but the people I talk to do. And they've all said the same thing. They like their chances. So, man, you tell me. This is one of the rare situations that I've seen in the last couple of years, because especially at a program like that, and for people in Ohio don't know, his high school is loaded.
Yes.
Every year. It's just, they murder people. So he's from a program and from the Trinity League in LA where he's used to going against competition, and he dominated. So that's why he has the Blue Buds after him. He had every offer in the country. All I know is he's going to announce in about 5 days, and your guess is probably as good as mine.
For those in Ohio or maybe in the Midwest that don't know a lot about St. John Bosco, How does the talent there, Brian, stack up to the talent in your neck of the woods at IMG?
Oh, well, I mean, they're one of a handful of schools that can actually compete with IMG. That's a whole different animal. I mean, like IMG's got 25, 30 Power 5 kids, that are like playing, not just like freshmen developing and stuff. You count them, they have over 30 on their roster, like literally. So it's a different deal, but they're so well coached and they usually have quarterback play. When you got quarterback play, the overall talent, as we've seen, doesn't have to be the same. So, man, it's an incredible program, and they compete with Mater Dei. If you haven't heard of Mater Dei and you follow high school football, where have you been? Those are the two schools that I think of most often when I think about LA, and they pump out a tremendous amount of talent. Like Bosco would win the state title in Ohio every year. They'd be the best team in Ohio every year. And sometimes they're as good a program as there is in the country. So it's elite.
It's definitely elite. And to me, I have a hard time following recruiting at a national level. There's so many athletes. Ohio State goes after some, but then there's guys in my neck of the woods, and there's guys down in South Florida, which you need to know about those names. But there's so many, it's hard to keep up. But it's not surprising that when I watched the film of Kingston, that his finalists are Ohio State, Notre Dame, and USC. It clearly makes sense why, when I watched the film, he is one of those guys at linebacker that Ohio State, Notre Dame, and USC all want the services of. And you're also getting a guy that I think is versatile, and you could pair him up with Peyton Pierce in Columbus in a few years down the road, and they could be the linebackers, the elite linebackers that Ohio State wants. When you watch the film, aside from like St. John Bosco and stuff like that, when you watch the film and describe the player that he is, what do you see?
Thumper. That's the first thing. When he hit kid, you kind of go like, oh, you kind of feel bad for that kid's mother if she's in the stands. And the second thing is with his frame, he is flat out right now college ready.
Yes.
Like physically and just his size. Now he's going to get in better shape. There's a difference between Bosco, even though it's Bosco, and Ohio State or USC or whatever. The strength and conditioning, that's a whole nother animal. Mm-hmm. But he's going to be a 240-pound middle linebacker in this era that's still able to cover. The number of those guys is really short. So there was a video I found accidentally the other day of him in coverage in a 7-on-7, and I'm like, he's way bigger than anybody else on defense, and he's picking off a pass, undercutting a route, and I'm like, okay, it's a little bit different when you're that big and you can run like that. So, yeah, there's a reason that he's that way, and he'd have a chance to start pretty early at a lot of programs, and all three of the ones that are his finalists, those included.
Brian, when I look at him and I just think back in my memory about linebackers, and I write down height and weight about the guys that we discussed here on the show, 6'3", 230, according to 247 Sports, that's not normal. We're going to talk about a guy in Edwin Spillman in a little bit, and he's listed on 247 Sports website, 6'1", 216. Probably going to get a guy 215, 220, maybe 225. But for him to be 230 in high school, and you already expect a guy once he gets to college to put on 5 to 10 pounds of good, healthy weight, that 240 and his ability to cover, I think that goes hand in hand with what offenses do in college. You need to have linebackers that can cover, and if he can do that at 240, be a thumper and hit you and make you feel it in the run game, but also cover very well, that's something that Ohio State desperately needs on defense.
It's funny you mentioned that, because when I was really starting to get into college football right out of high school, they had as good a linebacker group over 10, 12 years.
Did.
Almost every year they were conservatively a top 10 linebacker group, and sometimes the best. Belisari and different guys that they had Katzamoyer and all kinds of players. Yeah. This kid can play with any of them and start with any of them, and he'd have been fine. That's another way to grade it. His ability to run side to side and turn and move, again, it's just a little bit different than most kids. I was surprised by the film, because when I first saw him walk, like in the first clip, I'm like, he looks pretty big, man. I don't know. And then he can cover. And then I'm like, okay, that checkbox, we're good. Because in the tackle box, he's one of the few young linebackers that'll be able to hit and scrape with 320-pound men. You're not going to win a lot of those battles, but you got to at least be competitive. He'll be able to do that. The kid we're going to talk about in a minute, Spillman's a totally different kind of player, but again, there's just not many downhill guys that can do that and still be on the field on 3rd and 8. I think the big fella can be one of those guys.
We hear Brian go over things about Kyngstonn Viliamu-Asa. We have a couple more guys left. Edwin Spillman and Deontae Robinson. Locked on Buckeyes recruiting update here on a Wednesday continues next. This episode is brought to you by LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available. That's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Create a free job post in minutes on LinkedIn Jobs. Add your job in the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Brian, Kingston's one of those guys that when I talked to a recruiting analyst for Notre Dame, he thought at the time Ohio State had the upper hand. But I love how when you talk to the people that you talk to, they're saying they just don't know. And I think I mentioned it a week ago when we talked about Jaden Jackson, who recently committed to Oklahoma. I think this is a good sign for the young man that he is kind of having the right headspace. You don't always know. But I know a lot of times when players kind of keep things to themselves and keep things with their family, a lot of times I think it's a good sign of them. It's a good sign that they have a good circle around them and they make a good decision about where they're going to play college football. But I won't say about like the decision making itself, but since it's been so quiet, do you think it's probably that he stays home in Cali or goes to the Midwest to play football? Kind of 2 or 1. Let's go that way.
I think he'll leave because I think at the end of the day, it would have been easy to pick Southern Cal a long time ago. Used to be like in the Pete Carroll days, this had been a wrap.
Yeah.
It would have been a wrap.
Done a long time ago.
Would have been. I used to call a lot of the kids on the West Coast. I used to talk to Reggie Bush all the time and all these guys. And it was just cool to go to school. It's a totally different vibe. And, you know, that's kind of hard to replicate. I understand. But even with the coaching staff they have there, and they got a good head coach and recruiter, they haven't been able to get especially defensive kids. And I think it's going to be really interesting if they don't get him. That's kind of a bad trend for USC as a side point. They can't keep losing kids like him. The top defensive players in LA are leaving. But anyway, I don't know beyond that, though. Like at different points, I've been told either Ohio State or Notre Dame led. And I was told his USC visit might have been the best, but they were behind the other two. I don't know how you judge and project from all that. And I'm guessing that it could probably be changing day to day.
Yeah.
A lot of the time that happens. So if it is, and, you know, I wouldn't be shocked if he backed off and pushed the decision back either. Anything is plausible because, you know, these schools are just hammering him right now on why they should be the pick. So it wouldn't be very easy to be Kingston right now.
Last thing on Kingston. Should Buckeye fans be alarmed? Let's say he does commit to Ohio State in a few days and then decides to take some more visits in the fall. Should they be alarmed by that decision if ultimately he does commit to Ohio State later this weekend?
I think it would almost be shocking if he didn't, just because he's an elite player. I live in Florida, so I'm jaded because the vast majority of kids here, they do not have any loyalty. They have none. None. I mean, it's -5 million. So I'm jaded. I don't know the LA scene as much, but they are, you know, I was out in Elite 11 out in LA and stuff like that's different. It's a different vibe. It's much more chill. Especially South Florida is uber competitive with every single thing. But I just think it's part of the territory. You know what, man? I know this sucks, but like when you recruit at the level Ohio State is aspiring to recruit to, conservatively, over half your class is going to take other visits, et cetera, at some point. I know everybody wants, and I've said this on your show before, every one of the Locked On shows. The people listening to this care about the logo on the shirt. The kid cares about the person wearing the shirt. And that's just, it's a totally different reason on why they're watching the game or watching a recruitment, etc. I don't know which school has the best relationship with him. That's the thing. I've never heard one guy that was his dude, because usually that'll be the teeter-totter. I haven't heard that with Kyngstonn. Maybe it's just because I'm not as informed, but I have not heard that with him.
The next one, Edwin Spillman out of Nashville, Tennessee, Lipscomb Academy. Last I read, it was Ohio State, Tennessee, in a battle to get this talented linebacker. His commitment is coming up very, very soon on July 21st. 6'1", 216-pound linebacker, according to 247 Sports. Before we get to the prediction side of this, what kind of player is he?
I saw him last year, and he's a kid that can get vertical when he wants, and he'll shoot a gap. He's really aggressive, but I was really surprised at how well he pursued down the line and got through what I call the trash, getting in and around linemen, etc. And he's not the thumper that Kyngstonn is. That's a whole nother level of power because he's a lot bigger kid. But man, can he run. He's a modern-day linebacker that I would play at will in a 4-3 scheme, and I think he would have no problem doing it. And also, he's a kid that's really smart and articulate. He'll pick up the playbook wherever he goes. The school he's at is legit. Like, you don't go to school there, and they don't just push kids through. That's a legit school, and he's been coached. I believe he can make an early impact. So will linebackers where I would play him, he could probably even play some of the overhang and be that hybrid guy. Man, can he run.
Yeah, I watched some film of him earlier today, and I was kind of taken back and surprised at how much he lined up on the line of scrimmage outside the D end, and he was just making play here, making play there. And I noticed, didn't matter if it was a play his side or the play the opposite side, he has a nose for the football. And that's one thing with his instincts, and they kicked in. Brian, if you have a nose for the football and it's showing up on film over and over and over, that's really hard to teach.
Instincts, man. Like with the game I went to, they played a team they were completely overmatched. But even when they ended up being up 50-0 at halftime, literally.
Wow.
And they're loaded. But he had a play where he shot the gap. The score was already 21-0. But the way he was playing, you would have thought it was 21-21. Shot the gap. Guy was a really good running back. They were going to get, didn't matter to him. He hit him, got up and went back. Every play was the same. And you talk to coaches, Saban's famous for this. You got to play with the same effort no matter who you're playing against. Mm-hmm. Trying to get teenagers and early 20-somethings to do that is unbelievably difficult.
Yes. It's
probably why Saban will eventually have a heart attack. But it's hard. And this kid already does it. Everybody in the stadium knew the game was not going to be close. No, there was no discretion about that. He played as hard on the first snap until they pulled him out of the game. Very good sign.
Now, when it comes to Ohio State, and I believe the other school that's closest to them is Tennessee, Ohio State has the better track record. They've been the better team over the past, 20 years. That's easy to state. Tennessee also is the in-state school, and Volunteer faithful are going to want him there to stay in-state to play with them. How do you think the battle stacks up between Ohio State and Tennessee as far as what school has the current upper hand to receive the services of Edwin Spillman?
It depends on what he wants. You defined it very well. Ohio State's the better program. That's not really in debate unless you're talking to somebody that has something orange on. Because like most fan bases, they have zero objectivity. And I mean zero. Tennessee fans are pretty dyed in the wool. They could come off on a 1-11 season. They'd see orange. But it's interesting because he has a chance to be a part of a resurrection, because even though they were good last year, their defense still wasn't in the stratosphere where it needs to be. And they need more talent. They're selling him that. You can be the missing piece. Or you can go to Ohio State and they need a little more defensive talent. But let's be honest, the two programs are not on the same playing field at the moment. I would be surprised if he hasn't kind of figured it out, because they're completely different options. What do I want? I have no idea. The rumor is he's going to Tennessee, but I don't know him personally. I just met him and I haven't asked. So maybe he wants to be a part of that resurrection for them, or he could be like a really quick turnaround at Ohio State. That's my guess.
Last thing here on Spillman. How do you think the violations, the recruiting issues that they had under Jeremy Pruitt are maybe swaying him one way or another in regards to committing to Tennessee or committing to Ohio State?
Well, that is one of the goofiest, and this is the NCAA, which there's a lot of goofy with the NCAA. It's a terrible organization. What was it? $8 million, I believe they're fining them or whatever.
$8 million.
I mean, that's a lot of cash, by the way, but it doesn't impact the recruit, and they've already self-imposed penalties. I don't think it's going to matter that much. I was wondering if they were going to hit him with another 5 or 10 scholarships or something, but for the love of mankind, they took forever to come out with a final decision. I was just glad they got one. I was talking to a buddy of mine about a week ago, and they finally, it come out. But anyway, I don't think it'll make a big difference, and it's state U for him. So again, it's which direction is he looking? That's an A or B kind of deal.
We got through Kyngstonn Viliamu-Asa, Edwin Spillman. We have one more player left. This one's actually in the state of Florida, in Orlando. So this is one of those guys. If you've been around with Brian for a while, you realize he talks to the guys in South Florida, especially those in the Orlando, Tampa area. He knows Robinson, Deontae Robinson. This is why you don't want to miss the next breakdown about this recruit and where he might commit later this week. Locked On Buckeyes rolls on here on a Wednesday. Brian, I mentioned it earlier in the show. I always look. It's easy. I'm a football guy. I like sports. I like numbers. Height, weight, that means something. So I went on 247 Sports, and I looked at their breakdown, height, weight, simple stuff, the stars, all that jazz. 6'4", 300-pound mammoth human being is Deontae Robinson out of Orlando, Florida. His commitment's coming, the most recent, the soonest of all the guys we talk about today, coming on July 20th. This guy, when I watch him play, he's just so much fun to watch. He's in the backfield. He's controlling things. He's moving people. I saw him shoot a gap and quickly get to the quarterback and take him down. 6'4", 300 pounds. Some guys you may say, oh, he can't move or he's just stiff. No, he can move a little bit as a big boy, and I love it.
He's quite a bit above 300, actually, and it's still all about moving. I've seen him play 3-4 times, and I've seen him at Under Armour as well, where they tell him to go back and go sideways like a line. They did the D lineman like that, and I'm like, man, it is sickening how much physical gift he has. He can change direction, and he's probably the only guy in the state this year that is a ready-made D tackle to come in and play at a school like Texas, Florida, Ohio State, because he's been that guy a long time. He was always a massive kid. This is the spot I'm going to play. It wasn't like they had to force him inside. He knew he was going to be that guy, and he's embraced it. But he can break down, bend his knees, change direction, and check, like Tavion Swift is a running back at Osceola right down the road. I saw him break him down, and that's a kid that has 30 offers as a sophomore and tackling one-on-one. When you can do that, you've got a guy. And again, not many high school linemen are going to handle him. I mean, that's not rocket science, but he can blow up guys, and he can also one gap and get up the field. I think that Robinson is going to be a player that plays early. He just has to keep on the current path, man. Somebody's going to get a ball player. He's got 50 offers or whatever. I mean, that kind of speaks for itself. Yeah. Fun kid to be around, real boisterous. He fits the profile of an interior D lineman too. Big personality.
Brian, there's a guy at Ohio State in Tyleik Williams who many people have questioned previously. I don't know if it's still currently the conversation in practice, but questioned his work ethic and his conditioning, in-game conditioning. 6'4", 300, he says he's above 300 pounds. It makes me wonder, at the next level, does his work ethic help him stay in game shape week in, week out? Because I think it's a legitimate conversation to make, not just about a 300-pound guy. I think you could be a running back, you can be a linebacker, it doesn't matter. Conditioning in high school is different than conditioning in college. So are you questioning his work ethic to stay in shape and be game ready week in, week out?
I think that'll just change with him going to college. He's never had to do anything. Yeah. I mean, he plays at Jones, which is a big time program, but it's not the same, man. Like, what are you going to do? You're going to take him off the field? you don't have anybody to replace him with. He knows that too.
Right.
You know, sometimes when you're that dominant that early, like when he was a sophomore, we all knew that he was going to have 50 offers. He walked out on the field, you're like, holy crap. And then somebody says, by the way, he's got 2 more years after this to play high school. Like, oh my God.
Insane, man.
Yeah, he was like 280 or whatever. And, you know, he was 15 years old. So he was one of those guys. And I don't know what he does off the field, but I saw how he worked at Under Armour and he got after it and he was super competitive. So I'm not worried about it. He's just a naturally big-bodied, big-hip kid that can move. So wherever he goes, as long as he's motivated, he'll be just fine.
Last I saw, Florida, Ohio State, Texas, and Georgia are some of the schools that are at the top of the list. You have an in-state school. You got I can't say a couple SEC schools. Last year for Texas in the Big 12, they're going to the SEC, and that's a whole different animal for them. You have a Midwest school in Ohio State. Where does Ohio State stack up as far as ranking them amongst these other schools that are trying to get a commitment from Deontae Robinson?
Depends on who you talk to, but the biggest scuttlebutt is that Texas is the favorite.
Yeah.
I messaged with him earlier today just to, say, hey, I'll talk to you afterwards. I didn't try to get any, info or anything from him. But Texas is the word around here. Ohio State and Florida, depends on who you talk to, is in the next group. I don't even know what he's making his decision on because he was recruited by everybody, and he has been all over the map with recruiting. So, and I know the kid, if I hadn't heard somebody else say Texas, I wouldn't know that. Deontae is not giving out a lot of info. So I'll go with the Horns just because that's the rumor, but I've got no insight on that one.
Do you have any last comments you want to make about any of these guys we talked about today? Kyngstonn Viliamu-Asa, Edwin Spillman, or Deontae Robinson before we wrap up the show?
Kyngstonn, out of all the kids, and this is from a friend, they said he is as pure as it gets, as honest as it gets. Wherever he goes, he'll be a fan favorite. He's just a guy that relates to anybody and is down to earth. That's really cool because we don't get a lot of that in sport anymore. Let's be honest. There are a lot of jerks that are scoring touchdowns and making tackles. And once they get paid, especially, it's the attitude often goes in the wrong direction. So I've heard great things about him, and wherever he goes, I'm going to root for him. And I think the Ohio State fans should do the same.
Brian, love having you on the show. Can't wait to do it again next week. If you could, let everyone know where they can follow you on Twitter and maybe follow along with some of the things you're writing about recruiting during this part of the offseason.
At FB Scout _Florida. That's Twitter. And that's also on YouTube. I write for All Hurricanes on Fan Nation, covering Miami, but I really just cover the state of Florida and the South. It's more about recruiting than anything else on that site. And also, you're going to see me on some other podcasts on this network, I can assure you, one way or the other. So make sure you check it out.
And guys, you can follow me on Twitter at jstevens07. Send all of your emails to jstevens317@gmail.com. Love having Brian on. There's a good chance the next time we meet together on the show, we'll be talking about 1 or maybe 2 or maybe even 3 commitments from any of the guys we talked about during today's show. This is Locked on Buckeyes here on a Wednesday. I'll see you next time.